in Lagos, and we do have a guest in the house.
All right, our guest in our Lagos studio here is none other but Barrister Abumeri Osara, who is a legal practitioner. Good morning, Barrister. Thank you indeed for joining us.
Viewers. It's a pleasure to be here this morning and to be part of a discussion, a project that is dear to the heart of Nigeria.
We're glad to have you, sir. All right, now, you know, it's already a fact that Nigeria, as we have it, is already a federation. You know, while we're all busy talking about restructuring, that's like the current buzz within the political space right now. What really is this idea of restructuring?
Now, let me start by taking you up on your statements that Nigeria is already a federation. Yes, in truth, under the provisions of the Constitution, it is declared that Nigeria is a federal state. But when you look at what we have on ground, how the system operates, and you go back to what our founding fathers agreed upon in the 50s, you know, before Nigeria gained independence.
Yeah.
There were a series of conferences, both in Nigeria and in the UK, by our founding fathers, whereby they tried to work out the best means to live together. We have to remember that Nigeria is a heterogeneous society. It's a plural society made up of diverse ethnic groups, nationalities, with different religious background. Our founding fathers sat down and they said among themselves, how can we, a people of different nationalities, different religious background, diversities, plural society, how do we live together? And they came to the conclusion that the best way in which Nigerians can live together would be to have a federal system of government. And they came up with the 1960 Constitution, Independence Constitution, and the 1963 Republican Constitution. And if you look at the provisions in the 1960 and the 1963 Republican Constitution, that's when we had a true and authentic federal constitution.
So if we had a constitution that was that good, you know, that was functional for us as a people, at what point really did we deviate from that and then, you know, found ourselves with all this myriad of challenges?
It's the military. The military incursion into governance in Nigeria distorted the federal system. You recall Major General Agoye Aronsin. He came up, he struck the first salvo. He struck the first blow. He dealt the first blow to Nigeria entity as a federal entity when he came up with the unification decree. And he introduced unitary system of government and centralized form of governance. Everything now flew from Lagos to the regions. And then systematically, Gowon took over, and then we would take semblance of federal essence, but gradually under Gowon, systematically under Muritala Mohammed, Obasanjo as head of state, under Buhari, Babangida, and Abacha, the nation gradually was now started slipping away. And then there was one thing Gowon did. That was when he removed control of mineral resources from the states and regions to federal control. I think that was the final straw, really, that broke the camel's back. Because at the end of the day, everything boils down to resources. How do you allocate resources? How do you put in place a system that will enable the different nationalities to develop at their own pace and at their own rate? Because you see, what you desire, what you consider important and crucial in a particular state or region may not be what you desire in another region. In all federal systems that you have all over the world, one of the most important fundamental things to recognize is diversity, allowing the different persons, their capacity and ability to develop at their own pace.
So invariably, are you saying that the call for restructuring would actually handle all the issues of ethnic violence and resource control that is ongoing right now in the country?
Indeed, indeed, indeed. It will just, let me identify with the speech you just shown on air of the Southern Leaders Forum by the respected Yinka Odumaki. When we restructure, it will engender peace, unity, harmony, and development. And all these incessant calls coming from all segments of society. You know, some parts of Nigeria are even thinking of breaking away. Why do we have that situation? It's because of the defects inherent in the present unitary confederal system. Nigeria pretends to be a federal system, but in reality, it is not. It's more unitary than federal, because there's a command structure. Everything flows from Abuja. And most people refer to it as fidibotto federalism. Every month, everybody goes cap in hand to Abuja to resources.
Okay. All right. I think we should take this conversation to Ibadan. Joining us from that part of the country is a politician, Chief Saka Balogun. Good morning, Chief Balogun. Thank you indeed for your time with us on the program today. Now, I need to put one quick question across to you. Do we really need to restructure this country? Do you see any need for it?
You see, there is apparent confusion as to the different interpretations being given to restructuring. But the major point has been made by the last speaker, as well as Dr. Dumaki. You see, a lot of distortions had taken place in the original constitutions, both the Independence Constitution and the Republican Constitution. In fact, another name we can give to restructuring, which can eliminate the apparent confusion, is need for restoration. We originally had a federal constitution, but with the distortions arising from military intervention, starting from Aguiyi-Ironsi, through the military spectrum of interventions, including our leader here, General Olusegun Obasanjo. Of course, by any standard, even though we now call him chief president, former president, and so on, he's basically a military man, and he cannot dance out of the milieu of the military system, which he trained for, and which continue to influence his attitude in governance. So I would say that there is need, absolute need, for restructuring, but call it another name. If restructuring is annoying or is seen as an aberration, call it need for restoration. Let us have our constitution restored to the original position of the founding fathers. I am for it. I am for it for different reasons that have been adduced. So if you say, okay, apart from coming together to have another constitutional conference and so on, there is a body that can do this restoration, that can effect this restoration, and that body is ostensibly the National Assembly. I beg to say that the National Assembly, although constitutionally is in a position to do so, because of enlightened self-interest, is not attuned to doing it. So we must find another way, we must find another platform to effect this need for restoration if we want Nigeria to really survive, thrive, and progress.
You just said that you don't think the National Assembly is actually in the best position to handle this issue of restoration, as you have put it. In 2014, we had a national confab. They had lots of recommendations that were never really taken. Are you saying that we should be looking at another confab in the nearest future?
I'm not saying that, but if need be, yes. I cannot see any reason why any government that will stand by logic and by sincere commitment to progress and development in Nigeria, we just throw away that product of the last 2014 conference report and just throw it away. In fact, I think there is new light coming into that argument, that controversy. Even the APC government, which initially was part of it, apart from the name APC, all their members were there. Most of their members as members of the professions were there. But as a party, they danced away from it. But even recently, they set up a committee now to look at the necessity for restructuring. The panel is led by the governor of Kaduna, El-Rufai, very brilliant fellow. And to that extent, it means that most people are now looking at, are now having a second thought about having a look at that report of 2014 conference. I'm not necessarily asking for a new one. That one can be put to use. Look at it, see what can be achieved through it, either in terms of legislative amendments or laws, or in terms of executive action. But there is need for restructuring. If you are really serious with having a peaceful and progressive Nigeria, there is need for it.
Chief Sakabalogo, let me ask you another question. Should this restructuring thing we're all clamoring for, should it only be a political thing? Because we all know that there are some states in Nigeria that are not that viable, So how about the economic angle to all this? If we all go our separate ways, what happens to these states that are not that viable? How do they begin to sustain themselves, really?
There is a fundamental misconception, even in the last proposition. Restructuring does not mean going our different ways. It doesn't at all. In fact, that is the basic misunderstanding in the concept. To restructure is not to disintegrate. They are not synonymous. They are two different things. In fact, if we refuse to restructure, then we are craving for disintegration. That is my position. There are two different things. So I am assuming that you don't mean that restructuring is equivalent to disintegrating. That is the first thing. Second, yes, the amendments and so on and so forth are already there. Whether the National Assembly can do it or cannot do it can be looked at from the last voting pattern on the Act for Devolution. I was shocked, not surprised, shocked that the Senate and the House of Representatives could vote not to devolve powers from the central body to the states. Giving the states more power with adequate resources to be on their own, to utilize their resources, God-given resources in their respective areas, does not mean that we are disintegrating. No, it doesn't. It means that each region, each state will be given adequate resources to execute the mandate that is agreed to be given by consensus to that unit. There's a gap of difference between restructuring, devolution, and disintegration. I hope I'm making the point.
Clearly, you just said that restructuring is not synonymous with this integration. But then again, is it synonymous right now to the call for true federalism that we've had over time? And will it actually solve the issue of power devolution and local government autonomy, other matters that have been rising over time, in our countries and polity?
Yes, the present constitution is the organ, is the platform that defines what each unit, whether you say it's the state or the zone or whatever, can exercise, what powers each unit will exercise. To that extent, restructuring can facilitate remodeling, redefining, redetermining the various mandates that can be given to each unit. I'm aware that the Southwest governors of today, we not want to go back to the old region. It was so old, the Western region, because the people of Ekiti will not like to come back to Ibadan to have a kind of common government. May not. I'm not too sure. But if the states are the federating units, then the people of Ekiti will have power to exploit their own resources within their own state. They don't have to depend on license, given by the federal government somewhere to a mining authority without the knowledge, even without the consent, without any information from the powers in the state. That type of thing, that is the type of mix-up that restructuring will correct. Because the Constitution defines the modus operandi of the exercise of powers within the given state or unit, to the extent of control of resources, what organs of government can be established, like the state police, what cooperation can exist between one state and another, or among collection of states, to the extent that we need a new set of of laws to be able to determine that, yes, we need restructuring. And to the best of my knowledge, I'm not sure the National Assembly has now set up, and in terms of their mindset, irrespective of the particular, irrespective of the political parties they belong, I don't think they can do it.
Chief
Many thanks to Chief Saka
Thank you
Balogun
for joining us on the program today from Ibadan. Now back to our Lagos studios. Now, Barrister Abumere, he talked about so many things, but I want us to look critically at, the issue of devolution of power. Aside from all of the allocations, that everybody goes there to take from Abuja, it still represents a center of authority, you understand, for Nigerians. And I want to believe, that to an extent is what has kept us together, is a sign of we have to be, because there's one central place. Now, if we devolve power, from the center and all that, how do we maintain our unity, seeing that we are so diverse in so many, many ways? How do we maintain unity?
Now, our founding fathers, throughout the series of constitutional conferences they had in the 50s, had already taken care of this issue. The 1960 Independent Constitution and the 1963 Independent Constitution has adequately made provision as to the extent of powers of the federal and the regions. Now, under that beautiful arrangement of the 1963 and 1960, states, the regions, kept 50% of resources, mineral resources occurring within the particular region. Now, 30% of that was paid into what they call the distributable pool, and 20% went to the federal government for purposes of maintenance of common issues that are common, like defense, external affairs, and the like. So the restructuring does not mean whittling down or the power of the federal government. It only means that each federating unit will be allowed and given opportunity to develop at its own pace, at its own doing.
But let me butt in. Have we put into consideration the lot of the people in each federating unit? You know, for example, a state that is known to be not that viable, you know, and then it becomes a federating unit, you know, how would you, because by the time we're talking about development, it is a time-bound thing. It doesn't happen instantly. What happens to the people within that unit, you know, given the time they have to wait to develop?
Well, let me correct one misconception which most Nigerians have, that there are states that are not really viable within Nigeria. I'm happy that the last Constitutional Conference of 2014, you know, really went deep to look at the natural resources and the mineral resources available in most states of the country. And they came up with a report to say that, look, no state is devoid of mineral resources, and no state is devoid of capacity to develop and be viable. You have to remember that there are so many countries in the world that do not have mineral resources. They have grown to be among the leading economies of the world. Japan is a typical example. Another example is Singapore. And then we must not lose sight of the importance of human capital development. Human capital development. Now, if ultimately it turns out that some states feel that they are not able to survive and sustain themselves, there is room to merge, for merger. You merge. You can merge with another state.
And explore what advantages you can get.
Now, you cannot, now, look at the map of Nigeria. Look at the entire landmass of the north. Agrarian. There is nowhere you go to, scarcely anywhere you go to in any part of Nigeria that if you plant a seed, that it will not germinate, it will not grow.
So each state, what you're saying in essence is that each state should actually take out time to understand its own comparative advantage and actually use it to explore and develop its own state.
Precisely.
Okay, let us take the conversation now to Abuja. We have a social commentator joining us. He's Jaye Gaskia. Many thanks for joining us on Galaxy today. Amidst the call for restructuring and Clamour by various stakeholders, former President Olusegun Obasanjo seems to have a dissenting voice as regards this Clamour. He feels that what we need to restructure Nigerians, that is our mind and our understanding of the country, Nigeria. Do you really think a restructuring would actually start from our mindset?
Yeah, I think that it's important for us to look at the question of restructuring from a number of perspectives, and they are interrelated. These perspectives are interrelated, none of which can stand alone. So the first question you should ask yourself is that when anybody comes to you and is talking about restructuring, it is very important to ask, what do you mean by restructuring? What are you proposing by restructuring? Because this is quite different from, I mean, I understand all the general arguments, theoretical conceptions about what a federation needs to look like. It's an arrangement between two entities, a federating unit and the, you know, I mean, a federating center and the federating units, you know. So I understand all of that. But when you restructure Nigeria, what would the federating units look like? Mind you, between 1966, when we had the first military intervention, and the move away from what people call true federalism, up to this moment, we have also had a lived reality. We have a situation where you have 36 existing states now in the federation now. So my challenge is this. I understand that virtually every aspect of our life in Nigeria today, every sector of the economy needs to be restructured. We need economic restructuring. We need the restructuring of our mindset. We need political restructuring. I agree with all of these things. But I'm saying that when political elites talk about this, they should come with a concrete program. Now, Southern leaders, purported Southern leaders gathered somewhere recently, and you just aired some of the things that they said. Now, these are the same people who would expect to go and sit at whatever new conference or assembly where restructuring will be, discussed and debated. And they came out from a meeting where they claimed to have agreed on restructuring without telling us, from their own perspective as Southern leaders, what that restructuring would mean. So what will be the federated units? Are we going to have 36 federated units? Are we going to have 12 federated units? Are we going to have 11 federated units? How is this arrangement going to be, to be done? How would, and so on and so forth. People should come with concrete plans and concrete programs. I think that that's the most significant thing that needs to happen and to change this debate from just people talking. Now, if you ask me, the failure really is the failure of the political elite. All of these people who have gathered there, they are members of political parties. They are members of all of these political parties. They've been in power. They are in power at the moment. They are in opposition at the moment. None of them, as a political party, is actually handling this situation. They've been in power since 1999. You would think that if it was a serious elite and they were talking about restructuring, since 1999, how many years? They would have restructured this country. If there was a serious commitment to restructuring by these elites, they would have restructured Nigeria since 1999. Now, they come with all manner of contradictory arguments. You want to restructure Nigeria, which I agree with. You want powers to be devolved, which I agree with. And then you still want local government autonomy, which doesn't make sense. Local government is the exact and complete purview of the federating units. So these are the things that we need to really sit down and get together. Now, look at the people have talked about restoration and talked about going back to the 1963 Constitution. We can go back to the 1963 Constitution, that's true. But you cannot go back to the 1963 Constitution in totality, because the 1963 Constitution envisaged only 4 regions, 4 federated units. Now you have 36 states. So people have to start thinking. People really have to put on their thinking caps, and they need to start coming out with real concrete propositions. I was listening, and many of the commentators that have spoken before me, they talked about our founding fathers. I've wondered where our founding mothers are, but leave that aside. Our founding fathers sat down and they came together. But when they were negotiating Nigeria in the 1950s, they went with concrete programs. The action group went to the conference with a proposal for 8 federated units, 8 provinces. NCNC, led by Azikwe, went to that conference with a proposal for 10 provinces. They had a map of what these provinces will look like. They had, in their minds, they came with a list of what powers the federal government will have and what powers the federated units would have. This is the kind of thing we want to see. There is an existing 1999 constitution. It is flawed, fundamentally flawed. It needs to be changed. So you have in that constitution 68 items on the exclusive list for the federal government. You had barely less than 30 items on the concurrent list, which both the federal government and the state governments can legislate on. And then that same constitution goes ahead to say that any legislation made by the federal government, that federal legislation, even on the concurrent list, takes precedence over state legislation. So in other words, states really have no powers to make laws under this constitution. And so that's not a federation. Now, but if you are coming and you are talking about restructuring and devolution of powers, you have studied that constitution. You should be able to make concrete proposals. What items in the legislative list of that constitution should move away from the exclusive list into the state list, into the concurrent list. And by the way, should we really have a concurrent list? And should we have a concurrent list where federal law will supersede, state laws? Or should we just have a federal list, a state list, and then have a concurrent list where both of them can, so that you have a list where state can legislate exclusively and a list where the federal authority can legislate, exclusively. Now, the National Assembly came up and they were talking about devolution of power. They voted for state police and then they voted against devolution of power. It doesn't make sense. These are people who are not thinking. And then, fundamentally, really do. Where is the biggest challenge that we have in governance that we really need to restructure? Any restructuring that we do that is not based on that particular restructuring will be a failure. And what is this? Each one of us comes from communities. There is no community in Nigeria. No community in Nigeria, other than communities that are local government headquarters, state government headquarters, or federal capital that have a government. There is no community in Nigeria. All our communities, we have shown them, we say they are governed, they are ruled by traditional rulers. We have said by our constitution that traditional rulers are custodians of culture. They don't play any formal role in governance. So you have communities which are ungoverned spaces. There is no government. Meanwhile, these communities were self-governing before colonialism. They were self-governing during colonialism. They lost the power to govern themselves only after independence. Now, that is one fundamental restructuring that we need to do. Restore governance back to communities. Now, our communities have filled the vacuum by electing what they call, by putting together what they call community development associations that are elected from amongst them. But these are informal institutions and they play no formal role. So just take a look at everywhere in the world. Most of the developed countries, every community has its own government. And that is one of the fundamental restructuring that we need to do as a people. That needs to be done. On the basis of that, we then have to sort out the relationship between the federal center and the component units. And we need to sort out, do we need 36 states or 12 states or 14 states or 8 states as federating units? And all of these we need to be. So people who are making these propositions should come out with concrete proposals. That's the only way that we can negotiate. I've always insisted that a slogan cannot be negotiated. The only thing that can be negotiated is a program. You can't negotiate a slogan. Slogans are too specious. They mean different things to different people. And that's what we need to move away from if we are serious. But mind you, the fault really is the fault of the political elite. They've been in power since 1999. They talk about restructuring. They don't do anything about it with the powers that they have in terms of making that restructuring happen. Fault really.
Thank you so much indeed. Now let me quickly chip in 2 questions quickly. First of all, going by what you have said, the fact that there's still a lot of work, that needs to be done if we are to get it right. Are you then saying that we as a country, we're not ready for restructuring yet? I need to know that. And second of all, we can't talk about restructuring without touching on the other issue that the other school of thought really have been clamoring for, which is a total split up in Nigeria. Do you think there is anything of benefit in us splitting up as a people?
Again, let me begin with my conclusion. My conclusion again is that you have a political elite that lacks vision, that lacks foresight, that does not understand its own role in the country and on the continent. So having said that, let me then respond to your first question in terms of what do we really need and the clamor for restructuring and the rest of that. And my response is very clear. Nigeria needs to be restructured, but it's a fundamental restructuring that is necessary. All aspects of our life, political, economic, social, intellect, and the rest of that orientation. And we need to restructure our leadership. We need to have leaders that actually understand leadership and understand their role. And then it is also important to add that in addition to having this, that you have a situation and a context where when we talk about restructuring, we know what we're talking about. So is Nigeria ready for restructuring? Nigeria has been ready for restructuring for years. In any case, Nigeria has been consistently restructured. So it is not a question of whether we are ready, whether the nation itself is ready for restructuring or not. It is a question of whether the leadership, the political elite, they are ready for restructuring. I'm saying that I do not see any iota of seriousness or readiness on the part of the political elite. That the political elites are not making concrete, I challenge them, come out with concrete programs. And so if you are Afenifere, if you are Ohaneze Ndigbo and you say you want, if you are the Work Consulting Forum and you say you want restructuring, I challenge you to come out with a document and a blueprint of what you mean by restructuring and what a restructured Nigeria will look like. If you are Arewa Consultative Forum and you are saying that Nigeria does not need to be restructured and all of that, I challenge you to come out with a blueprint to say how Nigeria will work. Because Nigeria is not working right now. How Nigeria will work without restructuring. No, I mean, so I'm challenging our political elites to actually come out of their comfort zones, put on their thinking caps, and become intellectually, and politically responsible for once. That's my challenge to them. So they are the ones who are really not ready. And Nigerian citizens are ready. Nigerian citizens would follow their lead if they can see clear-cut, issues to engage with. That's what Nigerians are asking for. I have my own views. I've told you. I think that we need to restore governance to the local government area, to the communities that they should have democratically elected self-governments at community level. I think that we should sit down and talk about, what powers the federal government should have. The federal government the federal government should not have more powers than simply for foreign affairs, for the defense of territorial integrity, for commerce, for international trade, and the rest of that. Those are the things that the federal government should have. And then, of course, for maintaining balance, and then, for policy direction across the country. And that was why in the 1963 Constitution, you had the situation where you had, you have to actually also have a situation where you reverse the revenue generating and revenue collection powers. It is the federated units that should collect revenue. They then pay a tax to the federal center. That's why in the 1963 Constitution, you had a situation where they retained 50% of what they collected, paid 20% to a federal government account, and 30% to a common distributable pool that is then used by the federal government, again to support each of the federated units, and particularly to ensure that less viable units are not left behind and that they catch up. So it was more like an affirmative action fund, to ensure that no federated unit is actually left behind. Because again, restructuring Nigeria is about nation building. And nation building is about how do you invest our resources for the greater good, of our society. So that's important, and that question, really needs, to be answered. Then
question for you, Mr. Gaskia, before we let you go very quickly now. In all of this, what role does the National Assembly play in all of this? Because the Southern Leaders Forum seems to think that the National Assembly is actually regaling on the fight against, or the call for restructuring, that in as much as everyone is talking about restructuring, that the National Assembly is actually talking about constitutional amendment. What is the role or the place of the National Assembly in all of this clamor?
Ordinarily, the National Assembly should play a key and central role by our current constitution in terms of how we move forward with restructuring. Because restructuring is about fundamentally addressing the challenges and the flaws in the existing constitution. And therefore, it's about constitutional amendment. So the National Assembly will be expected to play that role. But again, I say, who are the people in the National Assembly? They are these political elites. Let's be very frank about this. If these regional bodies, if these sociocultural entities, if they really have that much hold, on the citizens in their respective regions, if Afenifere actually has what you can call a significant and dominant influence on the consciousness of the average Yoruba person in the Southwest, if Ohaneze Ndigbo really has, a dominant influence on the consciousness of the average person, in the Southeast of Nigeria, if Arewa Forum has that dominant influence on the average consciousness in the district, then there is no way they should have political representatives elected from those regions who will not be, aligned and in tuned to implementing, that popular consciousness. And that's what I'm saying. You see, there's a disconnect here. You have people who are talking about restructuring who have not taken the argument to the ordinary people in a manner that the ordinary people can understand and know what they want. Therefore, it will now inform how the ordinary people vote for people who will go into the National Assembly, who will now play a role in actually getting that done. It's like APC. APC came up with a manifesto that had all manner of promises. they will restructure governance, they will do all this, they will do all of that. Nobody interrogated that. Many of these elements are members of APC, and they have voted, they're there in the National Assembly. So I see a disconnect, and I think that is where everybody who is asking for, because what I think that they are looking for is that they are looking for a situation where a conference will be called, and they will be handpicked and selected to go and represent their different regions there. Now, what I would canvass for, if we say that the National Assembly cannot play that role, what I would canvass for is that, okay, let's have a constituent assembly, but that constituent assembly must be elected. So and if it is going to be by election, none of these elements would win elections in where they are coming from. And that's the challenge, because it means that they don't really even they have not been able to convince their own locality, their own purported followership about what needs to be done. And that is the first level of tax that they need to do. Because if they do that, if Afenifere really has a hold on the Southwest, if Ohanese really has a hold, on the Southeast, if Arewa Constituency really has a hold on the North, and if Middle Belt Congress has a hold on the Middle Belt, then you should have a situation, you should not have a situation where persons elected into political office from those areas would be acting contrary to the positions, of these regional confederations. And that's why I say it's actually really a failure of the political elite. If a political elite wants something to happen, then the political elite should organize itself and take itself back to the people, and it should not see this as separate from politics and political party. Why would an Afenifere member be a member of a political party that does not believe in restructuring? I mean, if they are really serious, why would an Ohanese Indigo leader or be a member of a political party that does not believe in restructuring? If they are really serious about this, and that's the challenge that I'm throwing back to them. That it is important that these things are sorted out so that we can actually move to a situation where a National Assembly can play its role in this restructuring something. It's the elite really that have failed.
Mr. John Jaye Gaskia, thank you indeed for your contributions to our program today. Now we're back to Lagos. Barrister, he put the heap of the blame, on the political elite. Do you agree with that?
I disagree with him.
Okay.
To an extent.
Okay.
Now, from his position, he seemed to be suggesting that the National Assembly has a major role to play in the process of restructuring. Now, we all agreed, from what you can see, Lagos, Ibadan, and Abuja, we are all agreed on the need to restructure. Now, where I see a divergence is the modality for that restructuring. Who should drive the process? By what means should the restructuring come into being? My view, frankly speaking, is that it is not the National Assembly whose existence or creation comes from the faulty constitution that we complain about. Because the constitution that we operate now is faulty. It's skewed. So many sections of the country, particularly the minorities, people from the South in particular, they feel shortchanged by the present arrangement that we have. They are the breadbasket of the nation. 80% or 90% of distributable revenue comes from there. But the constitution that we have does not guarantee them self-protection. So also in terms of question of representation, you find out a state like Bayelsa has just 8 local governments. With how many members in the House of Representatives? Just about 8. Whereas there are some states in some other parts of the country, they have 44. Some of these states were divided about 20, 30 years ago, and when you combine the total number of states, number of representatives coming from those states, the first state, second state, and the third state, they are having close to 100 representatives from those states. And when you look at what these states contribute to the nation coffers, 0, nil. Now, so long as we retain this faulty structure, the National Assembly should not be the body that will midwife. We saw a bit of it. It played out at the last attempt by the National Assembly to amend the Constitution. certain areas which certain areas of the country consider crucial, having to do with revenue allocation, was roundly defeated at both chambers, because the people advocating, the people who are suffering the most from such a skewed system, could not muster the necessary numbers. Democracy is a game of numbers.
So the more you
they are more in number, so they always have their way. So the best way to go about it is convoke a sovereign national conference, or we go back to the 2014 confab report. Let each constituent unit have its own representatives.
Okay.
All right.
And now my colleague from Abuja was saying that these various groups, the South-South group, PANDEF, the Honeze, that they seem to have no blueprint. I beg to disagree with him. Their blueprint, as far as we can remember, right from, you remember Dr. Beko Rason Kuti and Alao Akabashorun. Now, in the 80s, when they were making moves, making calls for sovereign national conference, we remember the group, MNR, Movement for National Reformation, ably led by the late Chief Anthony Enahoro. We have blueprint starting from A to Z of what a restructured Nigeria should look like. It exists. It is there. It's just that because of the fact that what the time you have is not sufficient for you to show the details of what was discussed at the South-South conference, the last South-South conference, a clip of which you showed. There exists a blueprint, and I do not think that it is National Assembly that should midwife it. The government should encourage and the convocation of a sovereign national conference. And then, like my friend from Abuja said, if we decide to go by way of election, now these leaders may not have, what it takes to run an election in Nigeria. Yeah. So, but there are interest groups, pressure groups, the intelligentsia, the market women, the traders,
all the stakeholders. Yeah.
Yes. Now they can all come together. Even the journalists, the trade union, they all send in their representatives, the youth leaders, the women group, the elders, then the political parties. They too will have their representatives. That is, if we decide to throw to the dustbin, like our leader has told us, that the 2014 Conval report, they hasn't even looked at it, which is very sad, which is contrary to what we were told in the heat of the campaigns. The ruling party today made restructuring as their #1 program. But it's amazing that as soon as they assumed power, they forgot about it. Now, one of the national leader that we know, he played an active role in NADECO and all others. But the party that he represents is speaking a different tone. And that's the major challenge that I see. It is the present ruling class that should be able to drive the process. Now, if they say they don't believe in it, it creates a problem. And it creates a situation where issues of the Kanu-like situation will begin to arise.
And thrive.
Because we all acknowledge that there are problems inherent in our federation. And that there's urgent need to redress. But when you have the ruling class not willing to address it, to look at it, it creates a serious problem for us.
All right, we are almost out of time, but let me quickly just take this message from one of our viewers. This is from Tony Njoku. He wrote to us from Ota in Ogun State. It just says, simply, restructuring of our dear nation is long overdue. Let's go or carry out opinion polls and see what the people want. Thanks and God bless Nigeria.
All right. Okay, so on a very quick last note, I also mentioned the issue of people who are asking for an outright split, in Nigeria, split up. What would you have to say about that? Do you think that would be beneficial to Nigeria as a country in any way? Quickly.
No, I don't subscribe to a split of Nigeria. I believe there is a unity in diversity. The bigger, the stronger that you become. But like John F. Kennedy said, if you make peaceful change, I know what will happen. So that is the more reason why we need to, why there is time, to look into this issue of addressing the agitations. We are happy that as at now, it remains at the level of discussion, level of conversation. When it gets to a situation where people now begin to feel, oh, look, it's as if it's not possible for us to realize our desire for self-growth and self-development. And then they may then begin to look at other alternatives of doing so, which we don't subscribe. And I trust and I hope that the government is listening. I'm encouraged by the fact that the ruling party has set up a committee to look at restructuring, even though we have reservation about the headship because it's expressed a view of being against anti-restructuring. We hope that they're able to address these issues. One important thing I want to point out is that the call by those persons, by people for restructuring, does not mean that they want Nigeria to disintegrate. What they want, what they are calling for, is for the country to develop, to grow, to be able to meet the yearnings and aspirations of every segment, for Nigeria to be able to take its pride of place in the Committee of Nations as the leading and the most populous black nation.
All right, thank you, Barrister Abumere. We are actually out of time. We want to say many thanks to all of our guests that have contributed to the show this morning.
Thank you, sir, for coming.
A lot of thanks to Chief Sakabalogo, a politician who joined us from Ibadan, and of course, Jai Gaske, a social commentator.
And also to Barrister Abumere Osara. Thank you indeed, sir,
Pleasure
for joining us.
Me.
All right, that's the show for today. Tomorrow at 10, let's do this again as we'll be bringing you the health edition of Galaxy Today. Enjoy the rest of your day.